The mechanics lesson. October deepened the way it always did in Velthorn, slowly, without announcement, the way a tide comes in rather than a storm. The mornings grew colder by increments too small to point to individually but too significant to ignore collectively. The trees along Cressick Lane went from green to the first uncertain yellows, then committed, over the course of a single weekend, to the full and extravagant gold that October considered its best work. The light changed its quality, it came lower now at a longer angle, and it caught things it had not caught in summer. The dust on windowsills, the worn patches on the pavement, the particular silver that iron gets when the cold settles into it. Velthorn in October had a kind of melancholy that was not unpleasant, the melancholy of a city settling into itself for the long months ahead, pulling its coat tighter and finding that it still fit. Cirith noticed all of this. She noticed most things had always been constitutionally oriented toward the observation of detail. It was one of the qualities her tutors had praised and her mother had quietly cultivated, this habit of attention, this unwillingness to look at the world superficially. What surprised her was not that she noticed, but what she noticed about. She had expected Velthorn to remain alien to her, a foreign landscape she moved through without connection, waiting for the day she could return to the Dominion and to the only life she had known. Instead, she found herself accumulating the city without intending to. She knew the sound the gate made when the children pushed it too hard. She knew the way the light came through the gap between the apartment blocks at exactly 4 in the afternoon and fell directly across the sandpit. She knew which floorboard in the school corridor creaked, and at what point in her stride to skip it, and she had never decided to learn any of these things, had simply found one day that she knew them. She was, without having agreed to it, becoming someone who lived in Velthorn. This unsettled her in ways she could not fully articulate. It felt in some obscure fashion like a concession, as though allowing herself to become comfortable was the same as accepting that the reason for her being here was permanent, that the fire would never come, that this was what her life was to be. She resisted this logic and could not quite defeat it, and so she carried it alongside her as children carry uncomfortable things, not resolved but endured. What made it endurable, increasingly, was the playground, and the man at the playground with his toolbox and his wandering tune. Their afternoons together had developed a shape without anyone designing one. Darrow arrived at the playground most days between 3:15 and 3:30, the variation depending on traffic and whether the parks department had needed him elsewhere first. Cirith arrived at 3, sometimes earlier, and was already in her habitual spot at the edge of the sandpit when he came through the gate. He would nod to her, not the performed nod of someone remembering to acknowledge a child, but the genuine nod of one colleague greeting another, and go to whatever needed doing that day. She would watch, and then at some point in the afternoon she would come closer. This had been her own progression, unstated and unencouraged. The first day she had moved from the sandpit to within 10 feet of where he was working. The next day, closer. By the end of the second week she was sitting on whatever surface was nearest to him, a low step, the edge of a planter, the ground itself, close enough to see exactly what his hands were doing, and she had started asking questions that were not polite questions but technical ones, the kind that required actual answers. To his considerable credit, Darrow gave her actual answers. He did not simplify unnecessarily. He did not condescend. He explained things at the level at which they were, and when she did not understand something he found a different approach, a different angle, sometimes a physical demonstration, sometimes an analogy, and he did not appear to find any of this effortful or inconvenient. He explained things the way a person explains things when they love the subject and have enough of it to give away freely, without worry of running out. She learned the names of his tools first, because the names were a kind of language, and she understood instinctively that you had to learn the language before you could speak it. Ratchet, socket, torque, wrench, feeler gauge, she repeated them to herself that evening in the apartment, lying on her back on the bed with the ceiling above her, committing them to memory the way she had committed the declensions of old Draconic, with the same seriousness, the same sense that the knowledge was worth the effort of keeping. She learned about mechanical advantage, the principle that a small force, applied correctly through a lever or a pulley, could move something many times its own weight. Darrow demonstrated this with a piece of rope and a section of scaffolding that he was rigging temporarily to replace a damaged overhead bar on the climbing frame. He ran the rope through the pulley with the patient narration of a teacher and let her feel the difference in her own hands, how much force it took without the mechanical advantage and how much less it took with it. She felt the principle pass through her hands and into her understanding, not as abstraction but as physical fact, as something her body now knew. Everything is about the distribution of force, he told her one afternoon in the second week, while he was replacing the bolts on the swing frame with galvanized ones that would last longer against the wet. The mistake people make is thinking more force is the answer. Usually it's just that the force you have is being wasted. Cirith turned this over in her mind. Wasted how? Going in the wrong direction, fighting against itself, applied at the wrong point. He tightened a bolt with a measured turn of the wrench, firm, precise, not more than required. You can push as hard as you like on a door that opens by pulling, you won't get anywhere. You have to understand the mechanism, she said. You have to understand the mechanism, he agreed. She was quiet for a moment, then, and if you do not know what the mechanism is. He glanced at her. There was something in the question that he heard as something other than a question about doors, but he did not press it. Then you find out, he said. You look, you test, you pay attention to what the thing itself is telling you. He turned to the next bolt. Mechanisms usually show you what they need if you're watching the right way. It was in the third week that she told him the fuller version of the story. She did not plan to, any more than she had planned to mention the fire the first time. It came in pieces over several afternoons the way ice melts, not all at once but from the edges, the places most exposed. She told him about the healers, about the ceremonies at the Ashbound Temple, about the third examination and the long report and the elder who had told her mother that some fires took longer to light and the way her mother had thanked him. Darrow listened to all of it. He did not interject. He did not offer solutions or suggestions. He listened the way he worked, with complete and unhurried attention, as though what was being said deserved the same quality of focus as any problem worth understanding. When she had finished, there was a silence that was not uncomfortable. He was replacing a spring mechanism on the roundabout, and his hands continued to move while he thought, the work and the thinking occupying separate parts of him without interfering with each other. What happens, he said finally, when you try? It was not a question she had been asked before, not in that precise form. The healers had asked what she felt. The priest had asked what she believed. Her mother had asked with her eyes more than her words if she was frightened. No one had asked quite this. I try to make it happen, she said. I concentrate on the ember ducts, the places behind my back teeth where the fire is supposed to begin. I try to generate heat there. I push. Push, he repeated. That is the only word I have for it. I try to force the thing to start. He was quiet for a moment longer. He finished what he was doing with the spring, tested the mechanism, found it satisfactory, and sat back on his heels. Can I tell you something? He said, and it was a genuine question, not a rhetorical one. He was actually asking permission, which she had noticed about him, this habit of asking before offering. Yes, she said. I was an apprentice. I was 17, working in a marine engineering yard down by the docks, big noisy place, nothing like this. I couldn't solder to save my life. He turned his torch over in his hands, looking at it without really seeing it. The technique isn't difficult, it's not physically demanding. You apply heat to the joint, not to the solder, and you let the solder flow into the joint through capillary action. Every apprentice learns it in the first week. Most of them have it within a day. He paused, she waited. I couldn't get it. For 2 months, everything I soldered looked like something had exploded onto it. Lumpy, cold joints, the solder sitting on top instead of flowing through, no conductivity, nothing. My master would come and look at my work and not say anything, which was worse than saying something. I tried harder, I concentrated more. I stared at the joint like I could make it right by force of will. A faint exhale, something between a breath and a quiet laugh. Which is, it turns out, exactly the wrong approach. What changed? Sirith asked. My master. He came to watch me one day, really watch, stood right behind me, and I was so conscious of him there that I made an absolute disaster of it, and he let me finish, and then he said one thing. He looked at her. You're holding the iron like you're afraid of it. The playground moved around them, the squeal of the swings, a distant argument over the climbing frame, the sound of a football hitting the fence. I said I wasn't afraid of burning myself. He said that wasn't what he meant. He set the torch down. He meant I was afraid of failing at it, so afraid of making another bad joint that every movement was locked up with the fear before it had a chance to be anything else. I was gripping the iron, I was holding my breath, I was focusing so hard on the outcome that I'd completely disconnected from the action. Sirith was very still. She was listening with everything she had, in the way that she listened when something was telling her something she had not previously understood but recognized, immediately, as true. He made me put the iron down and stand back from the bench. He made me shake out my hands. He made me take 3 full breaths. And then he said, don't think about the joint, think about the heat, just that, nothing else. Darrow picked up the torch again, clicked it on and off once, a small, habitual gesture. And I went back to the bench and I picked up the iron and I stopped thinking about whether it would work, and I just thought about the heat, the actual physical heat I was trying to apply to the actual physical joint in front of me. And it worked. Not perfectly, I had months of practice ahead of me to build the skill, but it worked. Because I stopped holding on to the outcome and started being present with the action. The silence that followed was different from the silences that came before. It had weight and texture and a quality of resonance, the way a bell sounds after it has been struck and the initial note has passed, and what remains is the vibration, still present, still spreading. You think, Sirith said slowly, that I am doing the same thing. I think, Darrow said carefully as he had once before, that you are trying to make the fire happen, And I don't know much about dragon fire. I know nothing about dragon fire, I should be honest, but I know something about what happens when a person tries to force a natural process rather than allowing the conditions for it. He looked at her directly, with the calm and complete attention she had come to recognize as his characteristic mode of seeing. You said you push. You said you concentrate on the mechanism and force it to start. And I hear in that I might be wrong, and I'm saying this as a mechanic, not as anyone who understands your situation. I hear someone who is so afraid of it not working that the fear is occupying all the space the thing needs to happen in. Sirith opened her mouth and closed it. She had never heard it put that way. She had never heard the center of the problem named so plainly, without ceremony, without the careful softening that everyone else applied to everything they said to her about this. She had never heard someone say, here is the mechanism, and here is the fault in how you are approaching it, not a fault in you, a fault in the approach. She found with some surprise that her eyes had gone warm. She blinked. She would not cry. She was not going to cry in a playground in front of a human mechanic. She was the daughter of the Dragon Empress, and she had more self-possession than that, but the warmth was there, undeniable, behind her eyes and in her throat. Everyone talks about it as though it is something that should simply arrive, she said, and her voice was level. She kept her voice level. As though I am waiting for a thing that is late, as though if I am patient enough it will show up on its own, or they tell me to try harder, which I have tried, which does not work, which I have been trying for 7 years. She pressed her clawed fingers into the ground beside her. No one has told me that the trying itself might be the problem. Most problems are like that, Darrow said quietly. The thing you're doing that isn't working is the thing getting in the way of the thing that would work. You can't see it because you're inside it. She looked at him. How do you see it from inside? He thought about this for a long moment. Usually, he said, you need someone outside it to point. Someone who isn't carrying the same fear, who can look at what you're doing without the weight of the outcome on them. They can see what you can't. He paused. Or sometimes you get very tired and you stop trying for a while, and in the stopping you accidentally do the thing correctly. And then you understand what you were doing wrong because you felt the right version, even if only once, even if by accident. Sirith absorbed this. She turned it over and over. She looked at it from different angles, the way she looked at a seized gear, feeling for the place where the thing might give. Your master, she said, what happened to him? Retired 20 years ago. Lives on the coast somewhere, I think, makes furniture now apparently. You should tell him, she said, that what he told you was important. Darrow looked at her with an expression she could not quite categorize, something warm and slightly surprised, the expression of a person who has been offered something they were not expecting. I should probably. People who say the right thing at the right moment should know that they did, she said, with the particular gravity of a 7-year-old who has decided that something is true. It seems unkind that they often do not. He regarded her for a moment, then he nodded. You're right, he said simply. She thought about what he had told her for the rest of that day, and through the evening, and through the night when she should have been sleeping. She lay in the dark in the apartment on Grieve Street, the attendant Osith's soft snoring audible through the wall, the guard Farron a motionless shape in the hallway, the sounds of Velthorn at night drifting in through the window she always left slightly open because she had developed, despite herself, a liking for the city's smell, and she turned the idea over the way she had turned the seized gear, the way she turned every problem that mattered. She was afraid. She had known this in some buried and unexamined way for a long time. She had known it and not known it, had carried it beneath the surface of all her trying, all her concentrating, all her pushing. She was afraid that when she tried and failed again, it would be the confirmation of something she could not name, but felt the shape of some verdict on her. Some fundamental truth about what she was or was not, that would be spoken at last and irrevocably by the continued silence inside her chest where the fire was supposed to live. And so every attempt carried the weight of that fear. Every moment of trying was simultaneously an attempt to produce fire and an attempt to forestall the verdict, and the two things worked against each other with perfect destructive efficiency, like two waves meeting in a channel and canceling each other out. She had been trying to force open a door that opened by pulling. She stared at the ceiling of the dark bedroom. The city murmured beyond the window. The cold autumn air touched her scales. The thing Darrow had not told her because she had not asked it yet, because she had not found the words for it yet, was how to stop being afraid. How to put down the fear the way he had put down the soldering iron and shaken out his hands. She did not know if it was the kind of thing that could be told or the kind of thing that had to be lived toward gradually in the practice of afternoons and the accumulation of small ordinary days. But she was aware in the dark of something she had not been aware of before. Not a resolution, not a remedy, not hope, not quite, but the honest shape of the problem seen clearly for the first time from the outside. She had not been able to see it from inside. He had pointed. She rolled onto her side, tucking her wings carefully around her, and she looked out through the gap in the curtains at the sliver of Velthorn sky visible from her bed, orange-black with the city's ambient light, a single star visible through a clearing in the cloud cover, small and steady above the rooftops. She did not try to breathe fire. She thought about the heat, only that. The actual physical fact of warmth, its nature, the way it moved and spread and found the spaces that were open to it. At the back of her throat, so faint she might have imagined it, so brief it was gone before she could be certain she had felt it. A warmth that had not been there before. Gone in an instant, not sustained. Not a flame, not even the suggestion of a flame, not anything that could be named or shown or offered as evidence to anyone. But there, and in the dark apartment in the city of Velthorn, the daughter of the Dragon Empress lay very still, and did not push and breathed and let it mean what it meant, which was not everything, but was undeniably, irrevocably, for the first time in 7 years something. The first flame. November came to Velthorn the way a held breath is finally released. It arrived overnight between a Tuesday and a Wednesday, and when Cirith pushed open the window of her bedroom on Grieve Street on that Wednesday morning, the change was immediate and total, not simply colder, though it was colder but different in character, in texture, in the quality of the light that came through the gap in the curtains. October had been melancholy in the way of a long farewell, golden and lingering and faintly regretful. November had no such sentimentality. November was the thing after the farewell, when the door had finally closed and the house had to decide what it was going to be now that the warmth had gone. The trees on Cressick Lane had surrendered their last leaves. The pavement was slick most mornings with a cold that had no name because it was not quite frost but was close enough that the body did not notice the difference. The sky sat low and uniform, the kind of gray that is not dramatic but absolute, not a storm sky, not even a troubled sky, simply a sky that had decided it was finished with anything other than gray and had committed to this decision with the full authority of the season. The children at the playground wore coats now and gloves, and the after-school hours had contracted with the light so that by 4:30 the day was already edging toward dark at its margins, the lampposts coming on earlier each evening, the shadows stretching and merging until the playground existed in a kind of amber half-light that was neither day nor night, but the particular in-between hour that belongs to autumn in cities. Cirith found she did not mind any of it. This surprised her. She had grown up in the Ember Dominion, where the climate maintained a quality of warmth that was not accidental but a direct consequence of what the Dominion's population was, a territory where dragons had lived for centuries, produced, by the simple biological fact of their presence, a sustained ambient heat that settled into the landscape and changed it over generations. The mountains were warmer than mountains should be. The rivers ran faster, fed by snowmelt that came earlier in the year than it did elsewhere. The plants were different, flowering earlier, growing taller, bearing fruit that tasted of something scorched and sweet. Even the cold months in the Dominion were merely cool rather than truly cold, moderated by the fires that burned in 10,000 hearths and the breath of 10,000 sleeping dragons and the underground heat vents that the great old dragons had over centuries, subtly influenced with their warmth. Velthorn was cold in a way the Dominion never was, and yet something in Cirith had adjusted, or was adjusting, with the quiet adaptability that children have when they are actually present in a place rather than merely passing through it. She had found herself layering, wearing the overlarge school jacket, and beneath it, the thermal underlayer that Osith had ordered with worried efficiency in the first week of October. She had found herself timing her arrival at the playground to coincide with the hour when the sun, on the days it appeared at all, cleared the roof of the eastern apartment block and laid a strip of warmth across the sandpit. She had, without deciding to, learned the rhythms of cold in this city the way she had learned its smells and its sounds, learned it in her body rather than her mind, the knowledge that lives in the adjustment of posture and the choice of seat. She was becoming, against every original resistance, a person who lived in November in Velthorn. She thought about this sometimes, with a complicated feeling that was not quite contentment and not quite grief but something that contained elements of both. The feeling of belonging to two places simultaneously, of carrying one world inside her while standing in another, and finding that the two did not cancel each other out but rather existed in a tension that was, somehow, generative. She was the Empress's daughter, and she was also the girl in the too large jacket who sat at the edge of the sandpit and knew which floorboard in the school corridor creaked. Both things were true. Both things were her. The fire had not come, but she had stopped trying to force it, which was different from giving up, though from the outside it might have looked the same. She had taken what Darrow had told her and she had been trying to do something with it in the privacy of the dark apartment on the nights when the city quieted and she was alone with herself. She had been trying to learn how to not try, which was, she was discovering, one of the most genuinely difficult things she had ever attempted. The habit of forcing was 7 years deep. It was grooved into her like a worn channel, and every time she turned her attention inward the old pattern reasserted itself before she had consciously decided to let it. But there were moments, Small ones, brief ones, there had been 3 or 4 more since that first night when she had felt the warmth at the back of her throat, each one slightly more present than the last, each one gone before it could become anything, like a candle flame in a draft that shows its existence only in the moment of being extinguished. She had not told anyone. She had not told Asith, who would have been professionally delighted in a way that would have made the whole thing feel fragile. She had not told Farron, though she suspected he would have simply nodded, which would actually have been the right response. She had not even told Darrow. She was not sure why she had not told Darrow. Possibly because telling him would have made it real in a way that would have reactivated the fear, would have made the small, tentative warmth into something that had been witnessed and reported, and therefore something that had to continue, had to progress, had to become what it was supposed to become. She was not ready for that weight yet. She was still learning how to hold the thing lightly, and she knew, with the particular self-knowledge that she had been developing through these weeks in Velthorn, that the moment she made it into something that other people were watching for, she would grip it, and the gripping would be the end of it. So she kept it. She turned it over in private. She practiced not trying in the only way she knew how, which was through the discipline of repeatedly returning to the right posture, the right quality of attention, the way Darrow had described returning to the solder after his master told him to think about the heat and only that. Think about the heat, only that, nothing else. It was a Thursday in the second week of November when things changed. Cirith arrived at the playground at her usual time, 2:45, while the last stragglers from the afternoon session were still making their reluctant way out through the gate. She nodded to 2 girls from her class who said hello with the uncomplicated friendliness of children who had not made a project of befriending her but had achieved a functional warmth through simple proximity over weeks. She took her seat at the edge of the sandpit. The playground settled into its afternoon rhythm. Children arrived in the wave that came from the school gate opening, loud and immediate, filling the space with the energy that had been contained in classrooms all day and now had permission to expand. The swings filled, the climbing frame filled, the roundabout began its slow and squealing rotation. Darrow arrived at 3:20 through the far gate with his toolbox and his familiar purposeful bearing. He nodded to her, she nodded back. He went to the far side of the playground where a section of fencing had come loose from its post and set his toolbox down. She watched him work as she always did, with the quality of attention she had developed over these weeks, not idle watching, not the watching of someone with nothing better to do but the active watching of someone who is learning, who is using observation as a form of understanding. She had learned a great deal from watching Darrow work. She had learned things about diagnosis, about patience, about the relationship between understanding a problem and knowing what to do about it. She had learned that the best mechanics, and she suspected the best practitioners of anything, did not simply apply solutions to problems, but spent a significant portion of their time asking the right questions, listening to what the thing itself was saying, following the evidence wherever it led rather than toward a predetermined answer. She had been trying to apply this to herself with mixed success. The afternoon moved through its usual paces. The children came and went from the equipment in the shifting patterns of playground democracy. The light moved through its arc across the small square of sky above the apartment blocks, from the pale thin brightness of early afternoon to the deepening amber of the later hours. The cold settled in more firmly as the light lowered. Most of the children had gone home by 4:15. It happened gradually, parents appearing at the gate, names called, the population thinning through the increments of early departure until what remained were a handful of children with later permissions, still occupying the swings and the climbing frame with the particular fervor of those who know their time is running short. Darrow was still working. He had moved from the fence to the carousel. There was always something with the carousel, and was checking the bearing race that Cirith had noticed on that first day, finally replacing it properly with a new component he had ordered through the parks department. He worked with the same unhurried precision she had come to know well, never rushing, never cutting corners on account of the cold or the fatting light or the approach of 5 o'clock. Cirith had been watching the sky. She was not sure when she had stopped watching Darrow and started watching the sky. She had not been thinking about the fire. She had not been thinking about anything in particular. This was something else she had been learning, this quality of rest that was not absence but presence without agenda, the state of being open without reaching. She had been watching the clouds move, the slow and enormous movement of weather that happened above the city regardless of the city, indifferent to it, carrying its vast purpose from elsewhere toward elsewhere, pausing over Velthorn only incidentally. She had been watching the light change. October had been gold. November was something cooler, more subdued. The light now was the color of old brass rather than fresh gold, and it came at such a low angle that it caught the underside of the clouds and turned them the color of heated metal just before it begins to glow. There was something in that particular quality of light in the specific color of it that Cirith found she could not look away from. It reminded her of something. It reminded her of the Dominion, of the way the sky looked over the eastern ranges in the deep winter when the sun set early and the cold made the light pure and horizontal, and the whole world seemed made of fire without burning, golden and amber and the deep red bronze of embers. Color with heat in it, not the performed heat of a ceremony but real heat, the heat that lives in the body of things. She was not thinking about fire. She was thinking about light and warmth, and the way the sky over Velthorn looked at this exact moment with the sun going down behind the apartment blocks and the clouds doing what they were doing, and she was 7 years old and alone at the edge of a sandpit in a city that was not her own. And she realized with a kind of simple and unadorned certainty, all right. She was right now in this moment all right. Not fixed, not completed, not the thing she was supposed to become. Just present, just here, just herself in November in Velthorn watching the sky. The warmth began so gradually that she was aware of it before she recognized it. It started as it had started on those other occasions, at the back of the throat, behind the back teeth, in the place that the healers had called the Ember Ducts and that she had spent 7 years trying to wake by force. But it was different this time, different in quality from those previous brief and tentative flickers. It did not announce itself. It did not arrive in response to any attempt or concentration or effort. It arrived the way warmth arrives when you have been cold for a long time and have almost forgotten what warmth is. And then you step into it, and your body recognizes it before your mind does. It was there, it was present, it was continuous. She did not move, she did not try to intensify it or direct it or do anything to it at all. She breathed in and out. She kept her attention on the sky, on the brass and amber light, on the clouds moving in their indifferent passage. She did not look inward, she did not check to see if it was still happening. She trusted it, which was the hardest thing, which was the thing she had been learning for weeks without knowing she was learning it, which was the whole of the lesson that Darrow had given her without using those words. She trusted it. The warmth grew, not explosively, not like something released after long confinement. It grew the way a fire grows when it has found good fuel and sufficient air, steadily, with the patience of natural process, filling the available space with the quiet authority of something doing what it was made to do. It reached her chest. It moved through the ducts that she had been told about in anatomy lessons, through the chambers and passages that existed in her body for precisely this purpose, had always existed, had always been waiting, structurally intact and perfectly formed, needing only this, needing only to be left alone long enough to do what they knew how to do. It reached her throat. It reached her mouth. She turned her head instinctively, away from the children who were still on the swings, away from the climbing frame, toward the open space between the sandpit and the fence where there was nothing that could be harmed. She opened her mouth. The flame that came from Cirith, only daughter of Valandra, Dragon Empress of the Ember Dominion, first flame of the Eastern Ranges, keeper of the Ashbound Throne, on a Thursday afternoon in November in a playground in Velthorn, was small. It was small, and it was gold at its center with amber at its edges. And it was warm, and it lasted, she counted it later, with the precision that she had always applied to things that mattered. It lasted 4 full seconds before she closed her mouth and it was gone. 4 seconds, not 12 inches. Not the roaring column of a dragonling coming into her power, not the magnificent and announced arrival that the court had awaited. Not anything that would have particularly impressed the healers or the priests or the ministers of the Ember Dominion with their technical documents and their professional expectations. 4 seconds of a small gold flame in a playground in Velthorn, produced by no effort at all, witnessed by no one except she turned her head, and found him watching one human mechanic standing at the side of the carousel with a bearing race in his hand, and an expression on his face of such complete and genuine quiet joy that it was, of all the things she had seen in her 7 years, one of the most moving. He did not shout, he did not applaud. He did not make it larger than it was or smaller than it was. He simply stood and looked at her across the cold and amberlit playground, and his expression said everything that needed saying without saying any of it, which was that he had been here and had seen it and that it was real and that she had done it and that it was enough. Cirith laughed. It came out of her the way the flame had come out of her, not forced, not performed, not managed. It came from the same place, from the space that had opened up inside her chest, the space that had been occupied for 7 years by the concentrated weight of trying and the fear that trying would prove something she could not bear to have proved. And that space was now no longer occupied by that weight, and it turned out that what lived there instead, what had always lived there underneath, was this. Laughter, unguarded and real, the laughter of a child who has just discovered that she is more than she thought she was. She laughed until her whole small body shook with it, her wings lifting slightly from her back with the involuntary motion of strong feeling, her clawed hands pressed into the sand, her amber eyes bright. Darrow set down the bearing race. He walked across the playground to the sandpit and sat down on its low edge, not beside her exactly but near enough, at the angle of a person who is keeping company rather than crowding. He did not say well done, which she was grateful for because well done would have been the wrong size for the moment. He did not say I knew you could do it, which would have been both presumptuous and untrue because neither of them had known not really. He said there it is. 3 words, quiet and factual and absolutely right. She sat with him until the last child had gone home and the playground was empty and the lampposts had committed fully to the evening, painting everything in their warm and slightly orange light. The cold had deepened in the way that it did after dark in November, proper cold now, the kind with intention, and she could see her breath when she exhaled, and that seemed this evening like a wonderful thing breath made visible, the body's warmth shown to the world. She breathed out again, watching the small cloud form and dissipate. Will it happen again, she asked, not with anxiety, with genuine curiosity which was different. I expect so, Darrow said. He was packing his toolbox, methodical as always. Things that happen once tend to happen again if you don't get in their way. And if I do get in their ways, then you notice and you get back out. He closed the toolbox, clicked the latches. That's all there is to it, really. That's what practice is, not always succeeding, getting back to the right posture when you've left it. She thought about this. That does not sound very glorious. He picked up the toolbox and looked at her with the expression she had come to know, the warm, direct, unembellished look that was simply seeing her accurately. No, he said, but it's what works. She stood up from the sandpit, brushing the sand from her scaled palms, and fell into step beside him as he walked toward the gate. They walked in the comfortable silence of people who do not need to fill all available space with words, the silence of a companionship that had been arrived at honestly, without effort, through the simple repetition of shared afternoons. At the gate he held it open for her. She went through and waited while he pulled it closed and tested the latch. They stood for a moment on the pavement outside where the street was doing its evening business, a man walking a dog, 2 women talking in a doorway, a bicycle going past with its light on. Darrow, she said. He looked at her. You should write to your master, she said, the one who taught you to solder. You should tell him that what he told you passed through you and into someone else and that it helped. She considered this. That seems like information a person would want to have. He was quiet for a moment, the way he was always quiet before he said something that meant something. I'll do that, he said. She nodded, satisfied. She turned to go. The apartment on Grieve Street was 4 blocks east, and Farron would be at the window and then turned back once more. Same time tomorrow, she asked. The smallest thing, an ordinary question asked every day in every city in the world by unremarkable people making unremarkable plans. And yet she felt the weight of what it meant, what it signified, not just the continuation of an afternoon but the choosing of it, the deliberate choosing of this city and this playground and this man with his toolbox and his wandering tune and his talent for saying the right thing plainly. Darrow picked up his toolbox. Same time tomorrow, he said. Across Velthorn, in the tower suite of the Grand Hotel where a dragon empress had been conducting the business of the Dominion at a careful distance, doing the hardest thing she had ever done, which was waiting and trusting, and not intervening, a scrying mirror on the wall had begun to glow. Valandra stood before it. She was in her human form, the form she wore in the city, smaller than her true self by a magnitude that still felt uncomfortable, still felt like a coat that did not quite fit. She wore it because she had to, because the city required it of her, because her daughter required of her the discipline of distance. And she had given her daughter this because it was what her daughter had needed, and because she was Valandra's mother before she was her empress. And mothers did what their children needed even when it was the hardest possible version of what that meant. The mirror glowed amber. Not gold, amber, the deep warm color of honey and old light, the color of a first flame that was small and real and genuinely itself rather than what anyone had expected or required it to be. She pressed her palm flat against the glass of it. The warmth came through. Actual warmth, physical and present, traveling the distance between a playground in November and a tower suite on the eastern edge of the city, carried in the resonance of a bloodline that went back further than records, further than memory, back to the first fire in the first mountains when the world was still deciding what it was going to be. Valandra closed her eyes. She stood very still, with her palm pressed to the amber-glowing mirror and the warmth of her daughter's first flame moving through her. And she did not perform any of the things she felt, did not cry, did not call for her attendance, did not compose the proclamation she had been drafting and discarding in her mind for 7 years. She simply stood in a hotel room in Velthorn in November and felt what it was to receive the thing she had been waiting for, and found that it was different from anything she had imagined, which was that it was not triumphant but tender, not a roar but a warmth, not the arrival of power but the arrival of her daughter, finally present in herself, finally free of the weight that had been on her since she was old enough to know it was there. After a while she breathed. and her breath on the cool air of the hotel room was warm, warmer than it had been, warmer by exactly the amount that hope, when it has been answered, adds to the temperature of a room. She opened her eyes. She looked at the mirror, still softly glowing. She allowed herself one thing, not a proclamation, not a ceremony, not any of the formal acknowledgments that the Dominion would require of her when she returned and could report what had happened. Just one thing, the smallest and most true thing. She smiled. In a playground 4 blocks west, a small dragonling walked east on Grieve Street with her chin up and her wings flat under a too large school jacket and November cold in her scales. And the memory of 4 seconds of gold flame alive in her chest like a coal that has just been touched by air and understood, for the first time, what it is supposed to do. She was not fixed, she was not finished. She had 4 seconds and a direction, and the knowledge felt now in her body rather than merely understood in her mind, that the thing she needed was not force but space, not effort but presence, not the trying but the stopping of the trying and the trusting of what lived in her when she got out of its way. She had a long way to go, she knew this. There was practice ahead and patience and the slow and unglamorous work of learning to maintain the right posture, to return to it when she left it, to trust again and again in the small repetitions of ordinary days. But the first flame had happened. Small and gold and 4 seconds long, in a playground in November, witnessed by a mechanic who had said the right thing at the right time and would be writing a letter to an old teacher before the week was out. It had happened. And things that happen once, if you do not get in their way, tend to happen again. Sirith turned the corner onto Grieve Street into the wind and walked home.